Okay, we made it. All right. I mean, it's always right up to the wire here. Lots going on. Great bunch of news stories will be posted within the half an hour for you. We're going to start off tonight with some old news, so to speak. How about the Dead Sea Scrolls? Now, that's a topic that many of you, including me, know very little about. I understand the general idea of what the Dead Sea Scrolls represent, how important they are. I don't know where the research is in decoding, deciphering, or reading them all, or if there are more to be found. And I wanted to find out more about this when I learned that Craig Winn, who was on very recently, is a world premier expert on the Dead Sea Scrolls. So I invited him back on tonight, and he is standing by now. Hello, Craig. Thanks for being here.
Jeff, it's a pleasure to be back with you. Yes, last time we talked about a very different set of scriptures, those in the Quran
yes,
and the
did.
Islamic Hadith, and how they inspire terrorism. This is an entirely different author and different subject.
What about the Dead Sea Scrolls? Let's just do a little bit of a recap from the beginning. When were they allegedly written, and when were they first discovered? I believe it was late 1940s when they were first found, something like that.
Early 1950s is when they were discovered. It didn't do the world much good, though, initially, because there was way too much infighting over them. The Jordanians at the time were in control of what's now called the West Bank, which is the area where they were discovered. So the Jordanians wanted control over them. The Roman Catholic Church was very powerful in Jerusalem, and they demanded control over them. And so this international fight transpired, and of course the scholastic community, they wanted control over them. And for the longest time, there was no access to them. And then there was this
Craig, yes. Excuse me, who had custody of them, and who was disallowing access?
The custody was shared between the Jordanian government and the Roman Catholic Church.
Ah, okay.
And they were at odds with one another, and they were completely secretive of the scholastic community, and they wouldn't allow anything out. So here they were putting together the scrolls, taking pictures of them, and they wouldn't share anything that they had discovered. And
how many of these?
Go ahead.
Let me just do a little bit more background for everybody. How many of these scrolls, so to speak, and I assume they were on ancient papyrus? Is that the medium?
No, these are all before papyrus. These are all parchment, animal skin.
Wow. Okay. How many were found? Have they all been found, or are we still hoping to locate more?
Well, I think that there will continue to be more that are found over time. What we have found is, for example, there's about 15 different scrolls covering parts of Genesis. A similar number, actually a few more, maybe in the 20s for Exodus. When you get into Devarim, Deuteronomy, you're up at the range of 40 scrolls covering parts of Devarim or Deuteronomy.
Wow.
We have some books like the book of Isaiah, where one of the scrolls is intact from beginning to end. It's called the Great Isaiah Scroll. It's why I spend more time translating Isaiah than any other, because we have the entire scroll, and we even have multiples of it as well. But
Craig, if I might, forgive my interruptions. I really want to make sure everybody understands all this. How long of a piece is this intact and complete scroll? 5 pages of normal writing today? 10 pages? Longer than that? What is it?
The Great Isaiah Scroll has a building that was built for it, a circular building, so they could unveil the entire scroll around the inside wall of a building. And I'm guessing we're looking at probably 100 plus feet in length. Isaiah would probably, if it was paginated as we paginate books today, would be in the range of 100 pages.
All right, fascinating. What is the approximate time of the creation of these scrolls?
Yeah, these scrolls were all copied from older scrolls, so they're all copies. There's not a single autograph, original autograph in the group. The oldest of them dates to around 250 BCE, and the latest of them happens to be, it's interesting, it's the Debatim Deuteronomy 5, which is the second time that the 10 statements that are mislabeled the 10 Commandments, they're covered a second time by Moshe, who is known as Moses. They're covered a second time, and the second time it's really quite different in some of the statements than it was on the first, more amplified, if you will, not contradictory, but a lot more information. And
now,
in fact, the whole 10 statements are just unbelievably insightful, because they're almost nothing compared to what people think is the 10 Commandments. Almost nothing in common with what we think of or been indoctrinated to believe are the 10 Commandments. In fact, there's not a commandment among the 10. But that's the most recent of them, and it dates just prior to the Roman assault in 70. Now, the Romans attacked the province of Judea, Yehuda, on two occasions. Once was 70, the next was 133. And the Essene community was attacked and destroyed in 70. And the Essenes were the ones that were writing these copies of the scrolls. And so that particular scroll is the youngest, if you will, of them, the most recently copied, and it was copied right around 65 CE.
Question: how old would the originals have been compared to their copies?
Sure.
What are we talking about?
Yashaya was the first part of Yashaya was written right around 715 BCE.
That's over half a millennium.
The first copy would have been written about 1450 BCE.
That's a millennium plus behind. That's way back.
Yes,
these are the most ancient scriptures, the most ancient texts that have ever been found, I guess, on the planet.
Correct. Oh, they are the oldest texts of these types found. The only, there are hieroglyphics, for example, that and in fact, there's texts even in Israel that date prior to these scrolls, because the scrolls are written on parchment. It's not like chiseling something in stone. Like the Mishnah stone is extremely important, because it's actually written in Paleo-Hebrew. It was written about 930 BCE, just after King David Dode is his actual name. And so we have inscriptions that talk about God's name, which happens to be Yahweh. Israel is a kingdom. Yehuda, Judah, King David, which his name is Dode, and verifying the stories that are in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. There are verifications chiseled in stone by in both Israel and among her neighbors that verify the authenticity of the text. We have them from Egypt, from Assyria, from Babylon, from the Hittites, and the Moabites.
All right. There's so many things to ask about this. Let me just do a couple more mundane things. Do these scrolls somehow legitimize the claim that Israel has always been in the Middle East, or, always in quotes, but that it does have heritage there, that it does go way back? Do these scrolls play a role in their claim of historical relevance and importance?
Yeah, that would be part of the reason that, of course, the Roman Catholic Church and the Kingdom of Jordan didn't want them released. Yes.
Right. Okay. Very good.
But not only do they do this. First of all, there is nothing of this kind to compare anywhere in the world. There is no historical portrait of a people that is anywhere remotely detailed like this, dating this far into antiquity. The only other piece of literature that we have any kind of real antiquity on, where there are multiple copies, would be Homer's books, the Iliad and the Odyssey. 5% as many ancient copies of the Iliad and the Odyssey as there are of the Torah, Prophets, and Psalms. So the Torah, Prophets, and Psalms are by a factor of 20 times better verified in ancient manuscripts than the second most verifiable ancient text.
This really, the dynamic of this is stunning. It really is
It is for a lot of reasons, and one of the reasons is that it's devastating to mainstream Orthodox Christianity that doesn't describe God with a name, for example, or that is into replacement theology, or that wants to ignore what's written in the Torah, Prophets, and Psalms. Yeah, it was displayed by God, but it's all been replaced. It's absolutely devastating to any religion that is practiced today.
Okay, what do the Dead Sea Scrolls do by way of showing us what was done in the great biblical rewrite at the Council of Nicaea?
Well, the Council of Nicaea had nothing to do with what's called the Torah, Prophets, and Psalms. The Christian misnomer would be the Old Testament. God doesn't have an Old Testament and a New Testament. He only has a Testament. And so the Council of Nicaea was only to decide which books would be part of what's called the Christian New Testament. But an accurate reading of the Torah, Prophets, and Psalms from the Dead Sea Scrolls doesn't even allow for a new covenant. So the Council of Nicaea would have zero effect on what we're talking about now.
Okay, all right, very good. All right, so how do we step into this Dead Sea Scrolls knowledge? What have we learned? What do they offer? You made the point that there's nothing to compare with it. I believe that.
Yeah.
They built a circular building to stretch this particular scroll all the way around the wall. That's fascinating. Were these people aware at the time that they were doing extraordinary work in preservation? They must have been. This had to be the reason that they were doing it.
It was one of the great callings to be able to provide a copy of the Torah, Prophets, and Psalms, particularly the Torah. In fact, one of the responsibilities of being a king in Yehuda or in Israel was that the first thing the king had to do was to copy by hand on parchment for himself an entire copy of the Torah.
Wow.
So there is few things that would be considered a higher calling than doing this. But what is really interesting, Jeff, is the difference that you mentioned, the Council of Nicaea. What I'm going to say now will sound like this is my opinion, and that my opinion is completely contrary to everything you're going to hear. But the fact is, what I'm going to share is absolute fact. It's totally and completely irrefutable.
Okay.
The Torah, Prophets, and Psalms have been surprisingly well preserved by what's called the Masoretes. They did some harm by creating a vocalization of an alphabet that already had 5 vowels, but it's very easy to look past their vocalizations and read the text as it should have been. They are about 84 to 85% accurate. And that's pretty remarkable, considering that 15 to 16% includes things like plural and singular, masculine versus feminine forms, conjunctions, pronouns, and that sort of thing. There's very few places where the actual text, not very few. There are places where the actual text has been changed by theologians and religious clerics, but they at least made an extraordinarily dedicated effort to convey the Hebrew text as it was written. The biggest problems with the Torah, Prophets, and Psalms is that English translations are not based on the Hebrew text, and they are not even remotely accurate or consistent with the Hebrew text. They weren't based on it. We can talk about that in a moment. But the point I wanted to make is the Christian New Testament isn't even remotely reliable. Let me just share some facts with your listeners. Let me share. And these are facts. This is not my opinion. Everybody's, they say you're entitled to your opinion. We are not entitled to your facts. Facts are facts. There are 69.
I like that too. That's good.
Right. Yeah, there are 69 pre-Constantine codexes. Now, these are all written on papyrus at this point. There's 69 that we have found that date prior to Constantine. The reason we use Constantine in around 300 CE is that after Constantine, the scribes, who were all paid by religious communities, were too free to have the text remain credible. Too free means they felt entitled to change the text to reflect whatever the sensibility was of their religious community. So prior to Constantine, we have 69 codices. There are over 300,000 known variances between those codices and the basis of our English translations.
Wow.
300,000. There's only 184,000 words in the Christian New Testament, and there's 300,000 variances.
That's staggering. It really is amazing.
This notion that is postulated in the Christian community that the text of their Bible is the inerrant Word of God isn't even within the realm of here to the sun. Is being accurate. It's the opposite is true. And it's not just that the underlying text was so carelessly maintained and unbelievably carelessly maintained. It's that the history of translations from them have never corrected the original mistakes. It was what you find if you track the history of Christian New Testament translations, that they begin by changing Greek to Old Latin because of the influence of the Roman Catholic Church. And then the Old Latin, there's letters between those who sought to, Jerome was the name that we call him today, wasn't his real name, but Jerome writing to the Pope and saying, listen, we don't have a leg to stand on anymore. If someone wants to say that what we're saying is inconsistent with the text of the New Testament, all they and we say, oh no, well no it isn't. They say, well, which manuscript? Because the manuscripts were so widely contradictory and conflicting by the time that Jerome took upon himself to take these old Latin manuscripts, which were not even in the Greek text. And by the way, Yosha, which is the real name of Jesus, his name wasn't Jesus, it was Yosha, means Yahweh saves. He spoke Hebrew. The oldest manuscripts we have were translated to Hebrew into Greek. And then the Greek text was translated into Old Latin. And then Jerome, because those Old Latin texts were so contradictory and so variant, took a blend of those texts and said, all right, this is kind of the consensus of what those texts read. And what we need for the church and to give the church its authority and power, we're going to add or take away. And that became the Vulgate, which was the Roman Catholics' Church's version of those books of the Christian
What
New
was
Testament.
The word again? What was that
Vulgate.
word?
Vulgate.
Spell it.
Vulgate.
Okay.
The Latin Vulgate is the text that was the only text of the Christian New Testament that was allowed, because what the Roman Catholic Church sought to do was to destroy all other texts. So if there was a Greek manuscript, they would destroy it. If there was an Old Latin manuscript, they would destroy it. And the reason they did it is the same thing that Islam did. If you destroy all old contradictory manuscripts, then you can make the claim that the one that remains is perfect.
Right.
Well, it's not. It's just
I get the idea.
Nobody has anything to compare it to anymore because you destroyed all of those that were contrary to it.
Yeah.
And
that's probably
what then
been done
happened,
a
it
lot
wasn't
more
until
than most
John
people would
Wycliffe.
imagine.
Yeah, it wasn't until John Wycliffe in around 1350, 1400. He translated a few books out of Latin, out of the Vulgate, into a precursor of English into Anglo-Saxon. And there were 5 translations thereafter. And by the way, the Roman Catholic Church burned all but one copy, tried to burn them all, and hunted Wycliffe down as if he was the most Catholic Church didn't want a copy of the text in a language that anybody spoke. They wanted to stay in Latin, a language that was only used within the church hierarchy. And so he was hunted down in those, and to have a copy in in private hands, or to have a copy in a language that people spoke or could read, was punishable by death, and the Roman Catholic Church had total power at that time. There were, over the years then, another 4 translations that were made based upon the Vulgate and Wycliffe's
hold
work.
on, Craig, I've got to pause here just for a minute. 4 translations made of what?
They were all made of the Latin Vulgate. So now you have you have your four languages away from the language that was spoken. Yosha spoke Hebrew, translated into to Greek in Egypt 200 to 400 years after the eyewitnesses. Then it was translated into Old Latin, then combined from Old Latin into the Latin of the Vulgate, and then from the Latin of the Vulgate to English.
All right, very good. Hold that.
Then the next 5 translations in English all were revisions of one another, as opposed to creating a new translation, or as opposed to even going to the Greek texts, which were now gradually being discovered.
So revising something often corrupts it, of course. Not always, but that's not a good thing necessarily. Stand by. We'll be right back with Craig Winn. Fascinating topic, the Dead Sea Scrolls. We continue right after this. Okay, Dead Sea Scrolls. Craig Winn. Craig, what have we learned from the Dead Sea Scrolls? What are some of the key things that have been illuminated with this astonishing storehouse of legendary wisdom and knowledge? Just remarkable.
Well, the first is that God has a name. He wrote his name exactly 7,000 times in the Hebrew text of the Torah, Prophets, and Psalms. And his name is easily pronounceable. It's written out of the same 22 letters that comprise every other word in the Torah, Prophets, and Psalms. In fact, his name is comprised entirely of vowels. 5 of the 22 letters.
All vowels.
All vowels.
That's a mouthful. That's interesting.
Yes. It's Yahweh. Yahweh. God's name. Yahweh.
It's not Yahweh. Yahweh.
No. Yahweh. Yes,
all right. You want to try and spell that in English?
Yeah, the Y in Hebrew is pronounced like the Y in English, like the Y in yes. Yeah.
Right.
The Hey in Hebrew is pronounced as an Ah. So it's Yah. And then the W in Hebrew is pronounced as an O. For example, Torah, you've heard of Torah. You've heard of Jews say Shalom, right? Shalom, the O in Shalom is from the Hebrew W, the Wah. The Torah, the O in Torah is from the Hebrew Wah. In fact, the ending of Torah is the same Hey, and so Torah actually teaches us how to pronounce Yahweh's name, because the only other letter in Yahweh's name is the Yod, the hand that is reaching down and out to us, is how it was originally drawn, which is pronounced exactly as it is in English. So, which means every letter of his name is easily known and easily pronounced. As I say, it's written 7,000 times. Now, you might think, well, that's no big deal, but God says, if you don't know my name, you don't know me. If you don't know him, he doesn't know you.
All right, very good. Now, hold on. What am I to think about the point of origin of all of this? Was it handed down from the divine to someone at a specific period? Was this an aggregation of a lot of holy material over time? What do we have? What do we think? Is there a point that we can look at and say, that's when it came down, that's when it was given to us?
It's an interesting explanation, because what it does is it's going to, and I'm going to answer your question directly, but I want, before I answer your question, to share with you something that was the most profound part of this discovery. Paleo-Hebrew, the Hebrew of the Torah, Prophets, and Psalms, is a language where the verbs are liberated in time. There's no past, present, and future tense. The verbs in Hebrew are like light. Time simply exists. All time exists on a photon of light. You can see the past, present, and future simultaneously. God, Yahweh, actually describes himself. He says, the closest thing that you would understand to my nature is light. Now, what that means is that as an energy-based being, as light, you can see the past, the present, and future simultaneously, which means God can see the culmination of all of man's choices years before we actually experience them, and can report in our past what he has witnessed. And so what God says is, if you want to know if I inspired the words that you're reading, then you will find these are the 7 things you should look for. And if you don't find all 7, and they're 100% consistent, then you know that it did not come from me. One error in any one of these 7 didn't come from me. And one of the tests is both Bo and Haya. Bo speaks of that which will come, and Haya speaks of that which is or has been. And so he says that everything that you read has to be 100% accurate as it relates to history and past, present, and future. And so God says that is the primary test that you should use to determine whether or not I inspired these words, because no one else can accurately describe what happened in the ancient past without a single error, and can accurately predict exactly what's going to happen in the future in great detail without a single error. And so that's how you come to know that the text that you're reading is inspired by a being who exists outside of the confines of time. It's one of the most powerful insights, because what it does is changes everything as it relates to God. Rather than believing, you can know. Powerful change, because the prophecies, both past, present, and future, prove that he authored this text, which means you can know that he exists and know exactly who he is, exactly what he's asking of us, and what he's offering in return. So no faith required. In fact, belief becomes a huge liability when knowing is possible.
Oh, it's a terrible construct which can use material like this to subvert and hegemonize and dominate the masses. That's what we do.
All religions. What's amazing is that the God who inspired these texts hates religion more than anything else on the planet. So the very religions that would claim that they are responsible for introducing people to God are the institutions that the actual God despises the most.
Very practical man or woman.
Very practical man. Yeah, well, he is. So the first thing we learn is about the creation account. The creation account is precisely accurate in the order of events scientifically and the time of those events. Now, it says that God created the heavens and the earth, the spiritual realm and the material realm, in 6 24-hour days. And yet we know that the universe is somewhere between 13.7 and 15 billion years old. And there's a range there, because the timing of the age of the Earth is based upon this concept called quark confinement. Prior to the time that energy cools to the point that quarks can be confined and that you actually have matter, time doesn't flow. So you cannot measure time until quarks are confined and we transition from energy to matter. In a pure energy environment, time simply is. It only flows once quarks confine. And so the temperature of quark confinement is the question to determine whether or not the universe is 13.7 or 15 billion years old. Now, what God says is he created the universe in 6 24-hour days from his perspective. Now, we know exactly how time flowed at the Big Bang. By the way, Big Bang is a term that Yahweh himself used several thousand years before man came up with the term.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely, Big Bang. In fact, if you go back to past 1950, 90% of scientists said that the universe has always existed, and that the Bible's concept that it had a creation was just myth. And of course, when the redshift was discovered by Hubble, 100% of scientists recognize now that the universe was created, and so their position with the Big Bang is wholly consistent with Yahweh's testimony. So we know, because of the Wilkinson microwave probe that measures measures the residual energy in deep space from the Big Bang, exactly how slow time moved at the point of creation and how the wavelength has subsequently been stretched. That's how we
measure time. At the point of, excuse me, Craig, at the point of creation, meaning what? Creation of the Earth?
All right.
Creation of the solar system?
Of the universe. The first, let there be light, let there be energy, and then energy expanded. Yeah, we use the term. Okay. He says it 3 times in the sentence, that the energy, the light energy that he entered into the system expanded. From that moment, at the point of creation, the universe is just shy of 15 billion years old. But we know that Einstein taught us something, Jeff, that
50 billion? How many?
No, 15,
15, I missed it. Okay.
Yeah,
got it. Sound good.
Now, Einstein, and it's 13.7 to 15, depending on what temperature of core confinement you choose. Now, Einstein taught us, in his theory of relativity, that time is not a constant, that time flows at different rates depending on the speed of the observer or the observer's proximity to energy or mass. You know, for example, if you were on a spaceship going to Saturn at half the speed of light, it might take what you would think would be a few days, while here on Earth, decades passed.
Got it.
Like our satellites, our GPS satellites, the time on the GPS satellites has to be adjusted constantly because they're moving so quickly that because of the rate that they're moving, time slows on those satellites, so it has to be adjusted. So we know exactly the rate that time flowed at creation. Time slowed at 10 to the 12th slower than it does for us as observers here on Earth. And that's what the Wilkinson probe demonstrated.
All right, Dead Sea Scrolls. Hold on. Okay. Dead Sea Scrolls and God state unequivocally that God created the universe. And the way we can potentially validate the Big Bang is because everything seems to be moving further out there in relative proximity to each other. Things are moving apart. So that it suggests an explosion and a 360-degree expansion.
Yes. Now, if you take the 10 to the 12th power that time has been stretched from the Big Bang, in other words, it flowed 10 to the 12th slower at the Big Bang than it flows here, and you divide 15 billion years by 10 to the 12th power, what do you think you get?
No.
How long did Yahweh say it took to create the universe from his perspective at creation?
I don't know the answer to that.
He said 6 days. If you
is that the traditional 6 days and he rested on the 7th kind of thing?
6 days is what he says. 6 days. So you take 15 billion years, which is our time looking here on Earth, you divide it by 10 to the 12th power, you get 6 24-hour days.
Huh. Funny. That's a good one.
It's a stunning. I mean, it's
that's
such
no
a
coincidence
stunning revelation that if you are the least bit rational and open-minded, your jaw's on the table and you're salivating to know more.
That's right.
That's the only rational response to that.
That's a knockout. That's what that is.
It's a knockout. You know, how about this one? When they talk about the flood and everybody wants to tell the flood was a myth and it didn't occur and all that sort of thing. Well, here's some really interesting things. You get to the Hebrew, and from the Dead Sea Scrolls, and you read about the flood. The first thing God says is that the impetus of the flood is going to be an upwelling of deep seawater. And it's an upwelling of deep seawater that's going to start the flood. And he didn't say it's going to flood the entire earth. He said it's going to flood a particular region. There was a particular region where man within the Salma, those were the descendants of Adam and Chava, were making a mess of things. They were being political. They were being religious. They were being vicious. Man was such a destructive beast early on that God says, I need to reset this or we're never going to have any chance.
What do you mean early on?
Early on, we're talking about this is 5,000 years ago. And God's saying, it's been 1,000 years since Adam and Chava. There was no Eve. Eve is the name of a pagan sun goddess. Her name was Chava. Adam and Chava were booted from the garden because they did the very thing that all of these religious translations have done. They misquoted God deliberately.
Is this in the Dead Sea? Is this Dead Sea Scroll material?
Yes. Yep. And so what God God says is that flood is going to start with an upwelling of deep sea water. So this is 5,000 years ago. About 10 years ago, we found the Burkle Impact Crater. The Burkle Impact Crater is just off of Mesopotamia, where the Tigris-Euphrates rivers dump into the ocean. It's 30 miles wide, about 20,000 feet below the Earth's surface. It created a tsunami of water moving at 500 miles an hour, 500 feet tall, where we find all of the residue of the deep sea ocean sediment that goes all the way up through and past the Black Sea, right up the heart of the Tigris-Euphrates rivers, covered with about 12 feet of mud as it relate to it. The Black Sea, which is where almost all of human civilization was at the time, was around a freshwater lake that all of a sudden turned to salt water 5,000 years ago, and the level rose 500 feet. All of those civilizations are still available to be seen. Ballard took an excursion there about 5 years ago, and then the water rushed out the Bosphorus Straits, and it was caused exactly by the method that God said, an upwelling of deep sea water. We found the asteroid impact crater, and we have all of the proof.
It's the first time you mentioned asteroid, and I was going to ask you, if that crater is 20,000 feet deep, that must have been a hell of an asteroid.
Yes.
Did you say 20,000?
20 and 35 miles across, I think, is the circumference of it. It's a huge crater.
And 20,000 feet deep. That's a 4-mile deep crater.
It had such an impact on the world at that time because of the debris that is shut up into the atmosphere that it rained every place for a long time. But it was only that area that was around the Black Sea and up the Tigris-Euphrates River that God wanted cleansed, and the event that caused it was a impact of an asteroid.
We are looking at, I just read a story today I posted that 2 more asteroids, only discovered 2 or 3 days ago, are about to scream past the planet. Very close. We don't even see these things. We can't track them all. We don't know.
No.
We can get smacked tomorrow morning.
God specifically talks about is called Apophis, and he said that Apophis would actually collide with the Earth in the middle of the 7 years of what's called the time of Jacob's trouble. Christians know this as the tribulation, but the actual name is the time of Jacob's trouble. Jacob means Israel's trouble, and it's the midway point of that 7-year period that an asteroid named Apophis is supposed to strike, which would mean around the middle of April in 2029. Guess what? MN 2004, discovered about 8 or 9 years ago, is scheduled to be a razor burn, the closest any large asteroids has come to the Earth while man is capable of measuring such things. In mid-April of 2029, it's going to become so close, it's inside of the satellite ring. That's if it doesn't hit anything or get pulled even a tiny fraction of 1 degree
inside the satellite ring. Inside. Now that's only 100 to 200 miles up.
It will be nudged while it's on this orbit, and it's going to hit.
How big is this item? Do we know?
About 11,000 feet across, 11,000 feet in diameter.
2 miles.
No, 11,000 feet. Is it really that? No.
5,280 feet.
I'm sorry, no, it's not 2 miles. 1,100 feet. It's just over 10.
So 20% of a mile. Okay, it's big enough.
Yes.
Now,
it's large enough that it would, if it hits in the Atlantic, it'll take out the European and American seaboards with about a 500-foot tsunami. And if it hits in the Pacific, it would take out the Japan and the United States west coast. And he says that it's large enough that it will have a devastating effect on the planet without it being.
And we're already tracking this one. Well, we have.
Absolutely. The science is tracking.
We've got 10 years to come up with some obviously nuclear interceptors to go up and deflect it.
Yeah, there's of course all the things that we have have to move it are fraught with peril. And even our attempt to nudge it that's going to cause the problem.
It could backfire on us, sure. And what bothers me is the simple fact that we don't know when many of these things appear. They just, oh my God, there goes one. It's halfway between the Earth and the Moon, and it's already past us.
Yeah.
We didn't know.
So some of the things, Jeff, that are just really fascinating would be the Torah. Christians, because of what Paul wrote, have been led to believe that the Torah is a book of laws. Torah doesn't mean law. There isn't a single law. Torah means teaching. The Hebrew word Torah means to teach, to guide. The Christians believe that it's a series of laws that have to be obeyed. You know, there's not even a Hebrew word for obey. There is none. God's into free will. You can't have obey in a free will construct. The next thing that was really, really interesting is that God has 7 annual meetings that he wants man to attend. And those meetings exist for all time, for all people and for all time. And there isn't a single Christian on the planet that observes any of them. And the two festivals that Christians observe, Christmas and Easter, are purely Babylonian and have no basis whatsoever in truth.
All right, we don't have a lot of time. The Dead Sea Scrolls need to be put in some kind of a bestseller format, the truth, the reality of it, and released. I don't know that this has been adequately disseminated to the masses yet. You probably tell me that, yes, it is available online, everything is, but this is so revolutionary in an evolutionary sense, it could take us to a much different place.
It takes you to a completely different place than religion and politics. What I have done,
religion to scam. We know that. Just like politics.
Complete scam. Yeah. What I've done is the last 18 years, I've dedicated between 8 and 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, to translating the Dead Sea Scrolls out of Hebrew into English. And I've made all of those translations not only available free online, but they're also available. You can go to Amazon. You can buy the books. The Yada Yah series, my name is Craig Winn. Google Craig Winn or the Yada Yah series. And I'm not trying to sell anything here because those books are sold by Amazon at the exact cost to print them. I make nothing on them. I don't make anything on anything I've ever written. I offer them entirely online for free. But I have written now 19 books, averaging about 1,000 pages a book on the translations of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And not only make those translations available, I include the Hebrew words that they are based upon in the generic form, translated within the translation, so that you can copy it, in a Google search engine. You can copy it, paste it, and you can verify whether or not my translation is accurate. So you can test what I have written to validate whether or not what I'm saying is true. And then I've written a commentary on what those insights reveal. So, I mean, some words are just so fascinating. They have so many facets of information. There's so many things we can learn. Or, for example, the core of the teaching is that God created the universe and conceived life, and then offered us his Torah teaching so that we would accept his covenant. And his covenant has 5 terms and conditions, and there's 5 benefits. And so I'll go through and I'll say, here's the testimony that demonstrates the authenticity of that statement, that there's 5 requirements to be part of the government and 5 benefits. And here's how this applies to your life, how it is discussed in other places, so that, because what I want readers to be able to do is to first make the transition from believing to knowing, because that's so powerful. And then from knowing to understanding, because that's infinitely more powerful than knowing. And so I write paragraphs sometimes on single words just to fully amplify them and to share what those sentences and those words mean to us today.
Okay, someone has written in and said, you had stated the other night, there is no Hebrew text or language. Are we talking Sumerian here? What are we talking about?
Oh, no, I didn't say there's no Hebrew. The Hebrew alphabet is the oldest alphabet there is. There is no alphabet that predates Hebrew. So Hebrew is the oldest alphabet. It has, the forms of the letters have evolved over time. The earliest form of the letters was pictorial. For example, I told you that
these predate Sumerian writings.
The Sumer, which was one of the earliest civilizations not destroyed under the Black Sea, did not have an form of writing. They had a cuneiform, which is not an alphabet, and so there are some non-alphabets that predated Hebrew, but there's no alphabetic language. In fact, the English word alphabet is based on Aleph and Bayat, the first two letters in the Hebrew language.
Got it. The Sumerian cuneiforms are then a whole different ballgame. I got it.
It's a whole different ballgame. It's not an alphabet.
Yeah. All right.
Like hieroglyphics are not an alphabet.
Yeah. Craig Winn, Craigwinn. Craig Winn. Give them your website URL.
Yeah,
Craig.
go to Yada Yah. YADA means to know, and Yah is the familial form of Yahweh's name, yadayah.com. And observations are an introduction to God.com, questioningpaul.com. I wrote a book that proves that Paul was a false prophet. The guy that authored 14 of the books of the Christian New Testament and is the reason that both the book of Luke and Acts exist was a complete fraud. God calls him the plague of death, actually calls him out by name. That's called questioningpaul.com. But the most interesting are the Yada Yah series. It's a series of 7 volumes, free in their entirety online, yadayah.com.
YADA?
YAH, yadayah.com, and they'll find all of the first 7 volumes on Yada Yah, and it'll link to an introduction to God and questioning Paul. And
well, Craig, you've knocked a lot of folks over with your research. That's a lot of work, a lot of years. Good job, and we'll have you back. We'll talk more about this. Make a list of things that we didn't get to tonight that you'd like to cover next visit, and we'll do it.
Sure, we'll talk about maybe the terms and conditions of the covenant, because everybody would like to live forever, right?
I think that's a winner for most people.
We'll talk about how that's possible, according to God.
Very good. All right, Craig. Thanks very much.
My pleasure, Jeff.
You take care. All righty.
All right, bye-bye. Good night.
Craig Winn. Interesting. Back with more in just a couple. Hang on.